Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merryweather and Tharp, and we are happy to have you with us for what's going to be a very, very action-packed show. Two great guests, Terrence Edwards, as per usual on Thursday. A lot to discuss with Terrence, including the brand-new coaching hires at UGA and the impact one of those hires, James Coley, is going to have on some of the guys that Terrence knows very well, top wide receivers for the class of 2025. That's a key discussion. Jake Fromm also on the program today there as well. Jake knows James Coley very well. Coley, as we said, now on the Georgia coaching staff, going back and looking at his previous tenure as the Georgia offensive coordinator. What can we take away from that in terms of the way in which Coley is going to be received as he returns to Georgia here for 2024? That should be interesting too. But in addition to that, also, a former Georgia player at the NFL Scouting Combine this week has had some very interesting things to say about what Georgia can be in 2024 and what Georgia was in 2023. I think you'll like this. It's off the top of the program here today. So let's go ahead and get it going. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merryweather and Tharp. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merryweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
You know, I didn't plan it this way, but I don't think it could have worked out much better. Yesterday, we talked on our program about the fact that I thought that ESPN had gotten something wrong as it relates to Georgia. Now, the truth is, ESPN these days seems to get a lot wrong. But in this particular case, I thought that they'd gotten one thing wrong as it relates to Georgia in talking about the biggest need they saw for UGA. And we enjoy those sort of conversation starter type things this time of year. We've said that before. But in talking about the biggest need for Georgia for the upcoming season, one of the things that the writer Mark Schlabach mentioned was the Georgia secondary. What I said was, listen, at this stage of the game, it seems like the Georgia secondary, even if you're sort of switching out some names on a year-to-year basis, that's pretty much a proven commodity. And you've got a guy like Malachi Starks, who already is one of the top players in college football. If you've got a long track record for success, a proven commodity, one of the best players in the country who plays in that secondary, then how big of a concern could the UGA secondary really be? Not to say there aren't unanswered questions, but we assume those unanswered questions will eventually have emphatic answers. And so we feel okay about the Georgia secondary, even if it's somewhat in flux. But that doesn't mean, and you heard us say this yesterday, that doesn't mean that Georgia doesn't have some real legitimate concerns. What I said on the show was, hey, listen, I've said this kind of a lot, that I think that one of the biggest things for Georgia as it tries to get back into the national championship conversation for the upcoming year, one of the biggest things is going to be, can you rebuild that offensive line? I should say that defensive line. Can you rebuild that defensive line? Can you replenish that defensive line and be, with that unit on that side of the ball, what you were in national championship seasons in 2021 or 2022? Or perhaps said a little bit better, you don't necessarily have to replicate 3 first-round picks the way that you had in 2021, or if you want to count Jalen Carter, a total of 4 first-round picks on that defensive line, or the situation in 2022 when Jalen Carter may have been the most awesome force for any team in the country when he was healthy and playing. You don't quite have to have that level of dynamic play from your defensive line, but you probably do need to be a little more dynamic, perhaps, than Georgia was at times in 2023. That was a topic that we addressed on yesterday's show. And then lo and behold, yesterday at the NFL Scouting Combine, the sort of first official Georgia moment of that combine, former Georgia defensive lineman Zion Logue, for what it's worth, the only former Dogs defensive lineman at the combine this week. Well, Zion Logue spoke with reporters there at the event. One of the questions that came up was and I do love this time of year. I love when the former Georgia players are at things like the Combine and they get a chance to talk about the guys that are still left behind them there at UGA, because nobody knows the group better. And sometimes being a little bit removed from the program, eligibility is expired, you're moving on to the NFL draft. Sometimes when you're kind of moving on, you have a tendency to be maybe a little bit more candid about some things than you might be when you're kind of within the confines of the typical Georgia media structure. You understand all of that. And so Logue yesterday was asked, hey, tell me about this defensive line that's still in place with you no longer a part of it. As you're going to the NFL, what's still at Georgia? Tell me how good you think this group can be here this year. And Zion Logue did not hold back in his belief that this has a chance to be a very good group. In fact, that's not even strong enough words. Much better than that. He thinks this group can be here this year. This is what Zion Logue said from Indianapolis yesterday.
A lot of those guys, Warren, Nas, not the D-tackle, Mike Hill, he's going to have a huge season coming up this year, man. That our room is so loaded. Like, a lot of people we don't get the recognition that we deserve because a lot of the time our defense is just so good. But just it's going to be a scary sight this season.
I mean, how much do you love that? Zion Logue saying the Georgia defensive line this upcoming season is going to be, he says, a scary sight to see. And that group is far more loaded. That's another word that he uses, far more loaded than people realize. And isn't it interesting to hear me on I guess it would have been a Tuesday, saying major concern, no, that would have been a Wednesday, major concern about the Georgia defensive line. And then shortly after that, Zion Logue says, let me tell you how good I think this group can be here this particular season. I think that's a fascinating quote from Zion Logue. Now, I also think the quote overall leads to a pretty important takeaway from us. You heard Zion Logue mention three guys by name right there. He mentions Nazir Stackhouse, he mentions Warren Brinson, and he also mentions Mykel Williams. Let's put a pin in Mykel Williams for a moment. And let's talk about Warren Brinson and Nazir Stackhouse. This was an exchange that I had with Mike Griffith on Wednesday where, Mike brings up the point, and I do get the kind of symmetry of this, that, well, in 2021, guys like Devontae Wyatt and Jordan Davis made the decision to return to Georgia. And that decision to return kind of propelled Georgia to a national championship. That is true. Narratively speaking, I believe that's true. And so it's easy to want to look at two defensive linemen who also chose to return, Warren Brinson and Nazir Stackhouse, and say, okay, now it's your turn to be what Davis and Wyatt were. I think to a certain extent that's kind of maybe a little bit unfair because the truth is Jordan Davis, gigantic as he is also kind of a plus athlete for his size. Devontae Wyatt, a plus athlete, I would say, for his size there as well. Not to say that Brinson and Nazir Stackhouse aren't incredibly athletic, but in terms of the way in which Davis and Wyatt truly blossomed in their final year at UGA, I'd take some of the pressure, off Brinson and Stackhouse. Clearly they want to do the same stuff, of course, but I'd say in terms of Georgia being what we all want it to be, I don't know that Brinson and Stackhouse need to be the version of what Davis and Wyatt were in 2021 in order for that to happen. They certainly don't need to be what Jalen Carter was in 2022 for Georgia to be able to have that success. They just need to contribute to a defensive line that improves its play compared to the totality of the unit a year before. The one stat that has come up on the show this week was the idea that Georgia last season in 2023 in terms of rushing yards per game, just 20th best in America. It's not bad, but that's not Georgia. What Georgia is 2022 when it was best in the country in terms of rushing yards allowed per game, and in 2021 when it was behind only Wisconsin as the number 2 rush defense, of course knowing that Wisconsin plays in the 3 yards and cloud of dust style Big Ten, a little bit easier to produce those type of stats. Georgia essentially best in the nation in run defense in its national championship seasons, a little bit below that in 2023. That's what you hope, I think, that Stackhouse and Brinson can really provide for you. Sort of a return to form in terms of being stout against the run, which then unleashes the Georgia defense to do some of the other things that it's done really well in its national championship seasons. And that's where the other name that Brinson mentions, I think, becomes really important here. I do believe that if we made a list of the most important players on the Georgia roster for this upcoming season, one of the guys that would rightly be on that list is one of the names that Zion Logue just mentioned. It's Mykel Williams. See, what I really thought the story of the 2023 defense was supposed to be was the face of the defense kind of emerging from sort of the outside edge. One of the guys that I had circled on that was Mykel Williams. For whatever reason, Williams didn't quite materialize that way this past season. Smarter people than me would explain why that is. Perhaps it's because he was maybe playing out of position. More on that in a moment. I also thought that a guy like Marvin Jones Jr. could be that. I really kind of predicted that would be the case, and for whatever reason, that didn't really happen either. Damon Wilson may have been a little too young, but I really thought the story of the 2023 defense was supposed to be in a year in which Georgia doesn't have the Jalen Carter, doesn't have the Jordan Davis, doesn't have the Trayvon Walker, the Devontae Wyatt. Can you find sort of an edge rusher type player coming off the outside part of the defense? Can you find a guy like that to kind of become the face of this defense and sort of redefine the playing personality for that unit? And Georgia probably stopped short of that. In fact, not only did they stop short of that kind of lofty projection, the truth is they kind of regressed, right? I mean, they gave up rushing yards on the outside. I mean, some of the rush defense we talked about before were, the edge not being set and guys finding success, on the outside runs in a way that we certainly were not customary and used to seeing, when it came to Georgia football. But when you think about what Georgia needs to be here in 2024, a guy like Mykel Williams, who's got all the accolades and all the attention, who's kind of look at the preseason projections for him just this past season. All of the spotlight is on Mykel Williams. And in this year for UGA, I think that the prediction that in a roundabout way Zion Logue makes there, it really needs to come true. Mykel Williams needs to have that kind of year for Georgia. It sort of takes you back a little bit to, as well, in Miami prior to the Orange Bowl, Georgia defensive coordinator Glenn Schumann talking about Mykel Williams. Now, the audio on this was not great, so I just decided to turn this into a quote. So if you're watching, I'm going to throw this on the screen. And if you're listening, radio and podcast, I'm going to read it to you. So what Schumann said about Mykel Williams at the time, in terms of the position fit and the idea that maybe he sort of slides outside of the defensive end spot, hand on the ground, so to speak, and kind of becomes a little bit more of an edge rusher, kind of playing stand up. What Schumann says there is Mykel's an edge player. I mentioned this earlier. He's always cross-trained at other positions. Sometimes you say changing role, the things that you've cross-trained in terms of, hey, being able to play defensive end and being a bigger outside linebacker, you decide that based on who's your best 11 on the field and what your opponent's doing. Schumann goes on to say, I know this. We'd like to play him on the edge more, whether that's at defensive end, jack, that's one of the linebacker positions, anything from that standpoint. He's one of our best players. We want to make sure that he's doing what he does best more often. That last sentence that Glenn Schumann speaks there is so important. Talent-wise, what he's shown in kind of early days as a Georgia player, there's no doubt in my mind that Mykel Williams really is, as Glenn Schumann says, one of Georgia's best players. And what Schumann also sort of projects for him, we need to make sure he's doing what he does best more often. That's exactly what you want to hear from your defensive coordinator, and exactly what I think the path needs to be for Mykel Williams here this season. Look, the bottom line is I love Zion Logue's projection for the Georgia defensive line. I love the fact that he's got confidence in his guys. I enjoy mentioning veteran players who made a very crucial decision to return to Georgia. Big things, of course, for Warren Brinson, and big things, of course, for Nazir Stackhouse. Of course, that's the case. But if we're thinking about like sort of future NFL draft projections, just to be honest, 2025 and perhaps beyond, a guy like Mykel Williams is going to be one of those guys that's sort of expected to be the first-round pick on this year's Georgia defense. Whether it's an outside linebacker, a defensive end, whatever he is, as an edge rusher, he's the type of guy who's sort of viewed to have that first-round draft pick potential. I don't know that we saw that as much as we could from Mykel in 2023, but boy, you got a chance to show that in 2024, both in terms of how Georgia chooses to use him and also in terms of what Mykel is able to display about his own talents and abilities. Zion Logue thinks the Georgia defensive line can be scary good for this upcoming season. We think defensive line, we sort of think front seven overall and the way the edge rushers impact that. I would say that Mykel Williams needs to be the face of this scary good Georgia defensive front here this year. And the loads of talent, the loaded level of talent that Logue thinks he sees at Georgia that other people might not know about, well, it's time for Zion Logue, and I should say it's time for Mykel Williams and others to truly introduce themselves to everybody in America and prove Zion Logue right along the way. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Merryweather and Tharp, and we are happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us. Live on video, it's 10 a.m. across all platforms. It's radio, Athens, Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Of course, podcasts, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We post the show each and every day. We are so happy to have you a part of the program and so thankful to our friends at Merryweather and Tharp who make it all possible. And one of the reasons why I'm thankful for that, obviously, they're great supporters of ours, and we're genuinely appreciative of that. But for me, this goes beyond just what I get out of this relationship. I would say that what really matters to me is what you get out of this there as well. And listen, so many of you have been so kind over the years to sort of tell me the story of your life when good things are happening. Hey, BA, just got a new job, or just had a new child, or something along those lines. And also when hard times have come your way, you've been kind enough to make us a part of that there too, because we enjoy the community we all have together. And what I know is, in the life of a Georgia football fan, the likes of which who listens to this, you're going to have all kinds of ups and downs, good times, bad times, things that you can control. Sometimes you find circumstances that are sort of out of your control. You're just simply playing the hand that life has dealt you. And in some cases, that involves the divorce process. I don't say that like flippantly or casually. I mean, I say that with full knowledge that if you find yourself dealing with divorce or fearful that you might be dealing with divorce, well, it's one of the scariest things you can ever encounter. And I can't make that completely disappear, and I can't make that completely go away. But what I can tell you is if you see this as an unavoidable reality for you, then the next best thing you can do for yourself, the next right thing to do, is to make sure you've got a good sort of explainer and advocate to walk through all of this with you. Obviously, someone to advocate on your behalf, that's really important, but also someone to explain to you the steps and the choices and the options and all of that. And there's no better group of folks to do that than our friends at Merryweather and Tharp. I want you to find them online. It's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That's the website, GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. It's a little bit of a new website for them, and part of the reason that is they're expanding their reach. They have an office in Savannah now. They got offices coming in Athens. What they've done in the Atlanta area for such a long time, they are now looking to do across the state of Georgia. And I think that's really important because they've served people so well here in the community where I live, and now they want to serve all across the state and really live up to the moniker we say, your source for Georgia divorce. That's what Merryweather and Tharp is all about. One of the ways in which they can do that for you is by providing you a sense of cost certainty about the divorce process. There's a lot of different options you can choose from. If you want the sort of full service traditional coverage, you can get that. You want a DIY option because you feel like your circumstances are a little bit less complicated and you think you can do something like that. Well, you can get the DIY option for as low as $99. A lot of people, and perhaps the most people, I think, are gravitating towards what they call the model M&T service, which includes a payment plan. You can do that on a subscription basis per month while your divorce process is ongoing. Or if you want to pay a flat rate, you can do that there as well. A lot of options. They're very creative in terms of how they serve you. So please check them out one more time. It's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That's the website. GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. Merryweather and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. All right, we have two great guests on our program here today. It's Jake Fromm coming up a little bit later on. Jake obviously knows James Coley very well. Coley now being back as wide receivers coach. What kind of coach is Georgia getting based on the guy who was the starting quarterback for the year in which Coley was offensive coordinator? And obviously there was some criticism of Coley that year. So we'll let Jake tell us what's really going on with all of that here coming up in just a bit. And speaking of new Georgia coaches, Terrence Edwards has also got some interesting perspective on all of that too. We will get to that in a couple of moments there too. But prior to that, let's go around the doghouse. I want to hear a little bit more from Zion Logue for a moment. And one of the things that Logue talked about yesterday, and Zion is far from the first, former Georgia player, former SEC player, to say something along the lines of this, that as he gets ready to move on to the NFL, he believes he's a more valuable prospect than some of the guys he's competing with to be on NFL rosters because of the league that he played in, the SEC. And yesterday, Logue really put that in no uncertain terms, that he's more prepared for Sundays because of the very tough Saturdays he's played in as a part of this league we call the SEC. Let me let you hear Zion Logue say that as a part of Around the Doghouse here.
100%, because it's never a down week in SEC, just like it's never a down week in NFL. You can go out on any given Sunday, Monday, or Thursday and get your butt kicked.
So because of the dominance that Georgia has shown in the SEC, including another undefeated regular season here this year, albeit coming up a little bit short in the SEC championship, it probably does not surprise you too much to find out that Logue believes that his team would have just been more prepared for a Michigan in a potential national championship game if it could have been the playoff than, say, a team like Washington. And, Zion, you're going to hear that's kind of funny, is sort of very careful not to sort of say the kind of thing that can go viral, and I would say that's perhaps with good reason. He's there to play football, not to create viral quotes, and so he's going to be somewhat careful about the words that he uses. But the general sentiment that Logue expresses here is something that I believe almost every Georgia fan agrees with, that if Georgia could have been in that playoff, if it had been selected to be there, there's a very good chance it'd be Georgia talking about a third straight national championship instead of Michigan talking about finally winning one. And I thought that Zion was pretty candid about this yesterday. Let me let you hear this too.
I definitely feel like we would have won it, but that's just you're not going to say you're going to make it all the way to the national championship and lose.
Sure.
But I feel like we would have did some things different.
Well, tell me, haven't seen Michigan. You played them before. How would that game have played out from what you saw out of them?
Honestly, I feel like our defense would have we would have stacked up. I'm trying to word this so I don't get clicked. Pac-12 football going against Big Ten caliber, but SEC caliber offensive line. You don't really have the beef in the middle to stop that run, I can say. But they did what they have. They did what they could with what they had. So I feel like that was the changing point.
Yeah, listen, I've got no problem with what Logue is saying there. I think most Georgia fans probably agree with that too, that Georgia was certainly a better team than Washington, and we would think in a head-to-head matchup, there's no reason for Georgia to be afraid of Michigan at all. Yes, Georgia has to live with the pain of coming up 3 points short against Alabama, but could Georgia have won that game? And maybe would some of us predicted that Georgia would have won that game? I would say, of course, we would have. And I think the point you build to in all this is that there are a lot of people, and some of these people are even Georgia fans themselves, of, well, Georgia has no right to say that because Georgia lost. Georgia may have only been the second-best team in the SEC this year on the basis of on-field results, having obviously lost the Crimson Tide in the SEC championship. And what we try to tell you at the time is, we feel very strongly about this, is that the idea that Georgia should have conceded the college football playoff argument and discussion simply because it lost its SEC championship game to Alabama, that was never as logical or as true as some people were convinced that it was. It was conventional wisdom that was the prevailing viewpoint of the majority of people, but just because it was a minority opinion that Georgia should have been in the top four doesn't mean it was any less wrong. And what we see is the evolution now, the college football playoff, would seem to suggest how right I was in this. We're going to talk more about this later on the show, but I want to show you this from Ross Dellinger on the screen here for a moment. So we know this was the last year of the 14 playoff here in 2023. We also know that we're going into a 12-team playoff for the next couple of years. But then beyond that, Ross Dellinger says we're right there on the doorstep of expanding to a 14-team playoff, which is going to include 3 automatic qualifiers for both the SEC and the Big Ten, compared to just 2 for the Big 12 and the ACC, and then 1 from the Group of 5, and then 3 more at-large teams. And this format is somewhat controversial, as you might imagine. We're going to talk later on about just why that is. But the point I'm getting to here is that some people look at this and they're like, well, how can the SEC be guaranteed more playoff spots than the ACC or guaranteed more playoff spots than the Big 12? How can that be the case? And the answer is, it's because it's a better league. And it's always been a better league. And now that it makes financial sense to acknowledge that, that's what the college football playoff seems to want to do. But when it did not make financial sense to acknowledge that, college football was more than happy to pretend that all the leagues are equal and that if you're the conference champion of this league, you're better than the second best team of this other league because we're pretending that all of this is a level playing field and all of this is equal. But that was never true. And Zion Logue points that out. Had we played Michigan, we played better than Washington? Of course we would have, because we are better than Washington because we are in a better league. And that was always true, and that should have always been the dominant argument. As we said over and over, why would a team like Washington, who doesn't even, want to be in its own conference anymore, why would that conference championship hold any weight with us? The same thing for Texas coming out of the Big 12 or whatever else. That the argument of Georgia being one of the best teams in the country because it plays in one of the best leagues, the year-over-year best league in the country, of course that was the winning argument, even if it wasn't the prevailing opinion at the time. So we would say the future of the college football playoff sort of proves that. Now that the financial incentive is acknowledging the truth, yes, the SEC is better than other leagues, that's what this committee seems willing to do. But when it made more financial sense to pretend that wasn't the case, they wanted to go the opposite direction. But just because they pretended all the leagues were equal, that didn't make them equal. I believe that Georgia has been on the wrong end of kind of an unfair and illogical process a couple of times during the playoff era. So if anybody's in favor of expanding to 14, it probably ought to be UGA. And Zion Logue's words perhaps explain why that is the case. That is Around the Doghouse here today there as well on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merryweather and Tharp. Fun show for us. It's Jake Fromm later on. We'll kind of do more of all of the changes, including college football playoff, that seem to be on the way here. We'll get to that coming up before we're done. But for now, on everything as it relates to UGA, maybe a little bit on Mykel Williams, but also a lot on how wide receivers are viewing the brand new coaching hires for Georgia. Let's do all of that right now as we talk to Terrence Edwards here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merryweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Great to have Terrence Edwards as a part of DawgNation Daily, presented by Merryweather and Tharp here today. Got the Mount Vernon sweatshirt on, looking good there on all of that. Terrence, we're glad to have you as a part of the program. And let me jump in with a little bit of what we were just discussing a moment ago. We'll get more into detail about this later on. We haven't even had a 12-team playoff yet, and there's already heavy discussion about moving to 14, and you get all these automatic qualifiers, and you're essentially creating a version of a postseason almost unrecognizable to anything the sport's ever had before. What do you make of the fact that this is not like just sort of rumor and innuendo, but apparently a very real discussion that even more change could be on its way for college football? Do you think this is too much?
I think it's all about the money. I think it always has been. I think 12 for the next few years and 14. So why did we skip 8, skip 6, jump to 12? I don't think anyone is going to be ever happy with the model, because someone is always going to get left out. It looks like it's going to be a Big Ten SEC invitational.
Yeah.
And those are the best two football leagues. So that's what the people I could get programs that's probably normally. I'm all for it.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's like, you don't really hear as much about who the best team is and how do you decide the most deserving champion. It does sort of seem to be more about how do you get the most money for the SEC and the Big Ten, the two biggest leagues? How do you create some level of access for the other conferences? Because you can make a case that they're going to give 2 spots to the Big 12. Well, why does the Big 12 deserve that? I mean, based on what this league looks like now with Texas and Oklahoma no longer in it, you almost make the case of why are we sure they deserve 2 teams? It's like, this seems to be a discussion about access for lesser powers and money for the greater powers, and the actual discussion of, how do you get the best teams in and create the best possible games? That just doesn't seem to be as much a part of the discussion right now. And for someone like me who truly loves college football and frankly has kind of enjoyed the college football playoff, it kind of concerns me how little the competitive part of this discussion seems to even be a part of the talk at all.
Right. I'm right there with you. I want to see competitive games. I for one, didn't enjoy the 63-3 beatdown of Florida State from Georgia. I enjoyed the TCU because it was the national championship game. But I want to see competitive games amongst college football traditional powerhouses. So I don't want to see the traditional beatdowns of Georgia beat, even though that's my school and I would love to see them win. I don't want to see that. I want to see a competitive game. I want to see what my school and what my players are made of once you get to a point where you're playing the likes of Michigan or Ohio State on a consistent basis in the playoffs.
I talked about Mykel Williams a little bit before you joined us, just based on something that Zion Logue had said yesterday at the NFL Scouting Combine. I feel pretty confident saying, Terrence, I believe that on paper, Mykel's one of like 2 or 3 most important players in this entire team. That if you're going to have a really true kind of breakout elite level player, Malachi Stark's probably already there. I'd say the next most likely option to join a guy like Malachi in a discussion like that is probably Mykel Williams. Do you agree with that assessment? And if you do, how good do you think that Mykel can be here this year at Georgia? And how much better can he make the Georgia defensive front as he kind of takes that next step?
I think the best thing that Georgia has done for Mykel is moving him outside to be an outside pass rusher instead of an inside 5 technique. You saw it in the Florida State game what he could do on the edge, and I think that's probably one of his biggest strengths is his size and ability to rush the passer. And I just think that's one of the things that any great program needs is that guy who can put pressure on the quarterback without having to manufacture blitzes or manufacturing pressure by bringing a +1. So I can't wait to see what he's able to do when he's truly an edge rusher. and he has the size to stack up against tackles to set the edge in the run game. So I'm excited to see, and he is one of the most important parts because you always need talented guys in the defensive line.
Yeah, that's indeed the case. And what I'm about to say is going to make me sound like more of like a scout than I actually am, or more of a football, maybe on the field expert than I actually am. But you think about like when Nolan was here and as an outside linebacker, and one of the knocks on Nolan. Listen, Nolan was truly an all-time great player at Georgia, but one of the knocks was, as an edge rusher, pass rusher, sometimes as a not the biggest guy in the world, became a little bit easy to get absorbed by some of those offensive tackles. To me, if a guy like Mikael Williams is potentially playing the outside linebacker position, assuming he's got the speed to get around the outside, someone who brings a little bit more size to that position, I think kind of gives Georgia maybe a little something that hasn't had there at that spot. We all love Nolan. We think Nolan was a great player, but Nolan never had big sack numbers or anything like that here, and I think his size was perhaps one of the reasons why that was the case. Also, perhaps how Georgia chose to use him from a schematic standpoint, but a bigger outside linebacker, bigger edge rusher type that's big enough to kind of do battle with these offensive tackles. Terrence, to me, that's a very interesting kind of football scenario that Georgia could have itself in here this year.
I think so. And I think if we were a base 4-3 defense, that he would be a traditional defensive end. So I do think he has the ability and the skill set to go out and be an edge pass rusher. Like you said, he's a bigger body than Nolan. You've seen Nolan 6'1", 230, but he had blazing speed. And I think Mikael goes to the 6'4", 6'5", 250 range. So he is that traditional type 4-3 defensive end with the skill set to play outside linebacker. So I'm excited to see what he could do on the edge, and I think it's probably his best position.
So I want to transition here to the new coaches that Georgia just hired, and I want to acknowledge the fact that, over the course of the last couple of weeks with Georgia having a wide receiver coaching opening, we had so many of our people saying, hey, the guy I want for that job is Terrence Edwards. That's the guy that I want. And, of course, I've made it very clear that I'm not a neutral observer on this. I'm a homer on this, that I think you would be great in a job like that. B, I do believe that you're going to be a college coach at some point in time. I also told our people that you've just become a head coach. I know how excited you are about all of that. But let me give you a chance just to respond to what's been kind of a hot topic among a lot of our audience that, as colleges such as Georgia are thinking about wide receiver coaches, that someone like you who has a history of on-field coaching and obviously great relationships with elite-level wide receiver recruits, which is the name of the game after all, that you'd be a good fit for a role like that. What do you think personally about the fact that, so many, people have kind of touted you for a job like this?
I think it's very humbling and honored that my name comes up when those jobs are open. I love teaching this position. I know that I have a unique skill set and a unique perspective on this position, and I know I would do a great job. I think, having the wide receiver job at Georgia, that comes with a great expectation. I think Kirby at this time is definitely in a position to bring in probably more experienced coaches that have coached on an experience level, on that level. But that doesn't mean that they're better coaches than me. So I understand why that he hires the people hire. And everyone know how I feel about Coach Coley. Once he got the job, I text him. He's one of my favorite coaches, and he did a great job in recruiting and coaching those receivers when he was the first time. So I'm excited about this hire. So, timing is everything. I just got the job at Mount Vernon. I'm here right now at Mount Vernon, and I love what I'm doing right now. So even if that opportunity didn't present itself, I am in a great opportunity where I'm at. I'm love where I'm at. So, one day, that may be my calling to coach at the collegiate level, but I love impacting high school kids as well. So wherever God has me, the timing of that, opportunities will come out.
I think we may have lost Terrence. I know he's having a little bit of an issue with the signal there, but you're hearing him say that that he's very happy with the job that he just took there at Mount Vernon, and I think getting a chance to be a head coach at the high school level in Georgia is obviously a really cool job. but also really kind of touting the job that James Coley's doing there, too. I believe we have Terrence back. Terrence, I know your time is limited. Let me squeeze in one more with you. You know, we've seen at DawgNation.com, Travis Smith, a guy that you know very well, kind of tout James Coley. I believe another one of your proteges, C.J. Wiley, has kind of done some of the same thing here. So talk to us about that, if you don't mind, the way in which James Coley has a history of really forging really strong relationships with receivers, such as the guys that you work with, and obviously throughout the years at a number of positions there as well. He is well known as a great recruiter. Would you mind speaking to us for a moment about how impactful Coley can be as a recruiter here now at Georgia?
Yes, man, he's a guy that can relate to these kids. And once he gets you on the phone, he's a likable human being, a good human being. So it's not, you know, I think he is, you know, the perfect guy for this situation. I think he is a guy that will form a relationship with Trav, with CJ, and all the other receivers that he's going to recruit. And it's just going to be a seamless transition from McClendon to back to James Coley. So I think this hire was a no-brainer for Kirby. But I would have loved to have had Kirby to hire Hines and me.
Yeah.
I was just joking with somebody like, hire both of us and we could kill two birds with one stone. It seemed like that was the ongoing talk on social media, you know, hire Hines and myself. Why not hire both of us?
That's right.
You know, I'm happy where I'm at. If that opportunity would have presented itself, I would definitely had to take a long look at it and just see if it fits for my family. And that's what it's going to come down to. Does it fit for my family?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously the workload involved with college football, as you know now, is intense. And I know you've got, children and family, and you enjoy being a part of the stuff that they're doing. I think balancing the schedule, it's one of the things we see happening a lot right now, where a lot of these college coaches are like, hey, I'm not sure I want to do this anymore. That it is a real consideration. Of course, anything like this, you would go into knowing full well what you're getting into. But it is a real consideration now of, you know, you pretty much got coaches working 365 days a year. It's like, hey, you know, if I can make good money doing something else, is that a better life right now than the grind of being a college coach? Because it seems like anybody who can find that pipeline to the NFL right now is pretty happy to take that off ramp if it's available to them, it appears.
Oh, I think so. I think the whole, you know, idea of college coaching college football is different than it was when I played. So I think the schedule, it just fits better in the NFL because college coaches is nonstop. I mean, once you're done with the season, you're right into recruiting to spring practice and into the summer. So it's a nonstop job. It's a grind, and you have to be all in to be successful coaching college football.
Really quick before I let you go, did you know Josh Crawford before he was hired here? I know he's been a big part of the high school football community for a long time, and having also coached at Tech and Western Kentucky. How well did you know Crawford before he got this job?
I just became close with Crawford this season. He was recruiting DeBron Gatlin out of Milton. So we really have kept in touch. I sent him a text once I heard that he got the job. So I don't know him as well as Coley, but our relationship has definitely became stronger throughout this whole recruiting process.
Good to hear that. Well, listen, Terrence, we love the work that you're doing out there with receivers and football players of all positions there at Mount Vernon, of course, as head coach, but also with the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy. So if people want to be the next Travis Smith, the next C.J. Wiley, the next LeBron Gatling, the next guy that you've worked with, how can they get in touch with the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy and get a part of that training that you've been doing here over the course of the last several weeks here as a part of that sort of bubble season? We're kind of pre-spring practice for a lot of these high school programs, and this is when the real work's taking place. So if people want to be a part of that, how can they engage with you?
Right. You can find me on social media at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Terrence, great stuff. We appreciate your time, and we'll look forward to chatting with you again very soon.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, good stuff from Terrence Edwards there, and interesting to hear his candid thoughts. I mean, obviously, if you're being mentioned the way that some Georgia fans are mentioning Edwards, well, of course you would have to take that seriously, the idea of maybe could be a college coach. And I do truly believe that Edwards will be. I shouldn't call him Edwards. He's Terrence. I say that like, I mean, I think that Terrence will be a college coach at some point in time. I mean, he's working on the kind of resume that, of course, would give him that opportunity. Now, I do think, as he said, listen, you also got to think about how that impacts the family that you're trying to raise and things like that. So there's some strong considerations. But he and his brother Robert, Robert's the head coach at Washington County. I know it had been talked about a little bit of, a guy like that, former Georgia running back, maybe he should be, running backs coach at a place like this. Either way, I love the fact that there's no really better pool, I think, to pull from in terms of your best college coaches than, these very dedicated high school coaches in a state like Georgia. I just think that's what you want. And look, I do take, people talk about talent drain, coaches leaving, go to the NFL, things like that. I do take the quality of the coaches in college football very serious because I've got a chance to know some of the players who play this sport, the families of the players who play this sport. And the thing that's valuable to them, perhaps the most valuable thing of all, is the relationship they have with the coaches that impact their lives. And so we want that to be the highest quality potential coaching you can get. And so I would say that as you look to sort of generate your next generation of SEC coaches and coaches across, college football, looking to the high school ranks in a place like Georgia is probably a pretty good place to do that in terms of who's next. And we already see a lot of that taking place on a fairly regular basis. Anyway, all right, we got Jake Fromm here coming up in a moment. Prior to that, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Let's get you ready for Allure of the Seas coming up in our DawgNation cruise in April. We've had so many meetings as of late about our DawgNation cruise, and I'm not probably supposed to say this, but I think we're going to do something kind of cool for the people who've now kind of been with us on multiple DawgNation cruises. We've got really a large handful of folks who've now coming back on a DawgNation cruise after having been on one of our previous DawgNation cruises. So I think we're going to kind of try to honor them kind of a cool and special way. So stay tuned for more information on that. I am not supposed to say that, but a little bit of a tease on something as it relates to that. And we watched this video that Cody's put together here, and boy, how nice is this when you think about an Oasis class ship like Allure of the Seas for our DawgNation cruise. Look right there. That's the Central Park neighborhood. When you look in on that, I mean, you talk about just walking around that with the actual live foliage, and it's like you're walking in a park, and you could, not even realize you're at sea. Just an amazing experience. One of the things that's going to make our DawgNation cruise so fun. We're going to Perfect Day Coco Cay. Y'all know how much I love that. We just had some folks get back on an Allure there, bragging about how much fun they had. Can't wait to do all of this with you. So Jessica Slater, she can help you out with all of your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation needs. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. That's jslater@dreamvacations.com. I also mentioned a moment ago, Cody Chaffins, who's been working with us and does a lot of the video stuff that you see. Really, the video product we've put out the last few months has been upgraded in such a huge way, and Cody's been a big part of that. Now Cody's going to be a regular part of our DawgNation Daily team this kind of coming out here, so I'm really excited about that, to have Cody as a part of what we're doing here. Just really, really good stuff. So our team's getting bigger and getting better, and I love that. Glad to have Cody here now on a regular basis. Before we get Jake Fromm, let me give you a couple of stories. And if we can we put the Ross Dellinger tweet from earlier or X post from earlier on the screen if we have that chance? So this is the news that's out there, and this is not like a hypothetical thing that could happen. It's also not a done deal, but we're heading fast towards, before we even implement the 12-team playoff, already looking ahead to a 14-team playoff where it's 3 automatic qualifiers for the Big Ten, the SEC, a couple of each for the Big 12 and the ACC, 1 for the Group of 5, and then a total of 3 at-larges. As Ross says, it's not finalized, and it's not the only option. There's more discussion and vetting that's expected. You'll remember, I believe we discussed this the other day, the SEC and the Big Ten originally wanted 4. They're going to settle here on 3, and then you'll save some at-large spots here. It's really interesting how much nobody seems to like this. And I guess in one respect I get this. I'm not necessarily against expanding the playoff. I think I have some tolerance for the playoff up to about 16 teams. I say when you get beyond that, you've probably got a little bit of a problem. But I think the expanded playoff for this year, I think 12 is better than 4. I do. And I don't know that 14 is much different than 12. I really don't. I think that some people, and I do understand this argument for the most part, they don't like this automatic qualifier deal because, as others have mentioned, you listen to the powers that be that are kind of talking and being quoted in these stories. A lot of this is about, access. Hey, the Big 12, the ACC, lesser leagues want to make sure they still have some seat at the table. The SEC, the Big Ten, they know they have supremacy. For instance, look at the 2024 signing class and go to like whichever website you prefer, On3, 24/7, whatever, and look at those rankings, the composite rankings. Look at how many of the top 10, top 20 teams are either in the SEC or in the Big Ten. It's almost the entirety of that really the ACC and the Big 12 always, to a degree, lesser leagues have been relegated even more so than that as of late. And so, therefore, the SEC, the Big Ten, they're saying, perhaps rightly so in their mind, we want to be treated as, superior leagues to these others. But to a lot of fans, and this is where I think you have a very important discussion, to a lot of them, it sort of feels like all of this is just sort of predetermined. You're not earning your way in based on how you play. It's all just predetermined. And to some people, the regular season, the importance of that's being lessened again. So, like a lot of the recent changes being announced in college football, this one not official yet, it's just amazing how tepid the response is on the part of fans. And how many times can you do things your fans don't really like before your fans have a little bit of a recoil about the sport? I don't know, but the powers that be seem intent on putting that to the test. Briefly here, I'll mention one more potential change that looks like it could be on the way, and we talked to Jake Fromm about this last week, a change from signing day, which used to be in February, then essentially moved to December, although the February date still existed. Now it could be changing again. There's been some talk about the beginning of December, but as of late, the most recent talk is about moving it to the end of June, which creates all kinds of potential problems for high school teams and maybe even high school seniors who decide to forego their senior season. But for the football coaches, they're like, well, if we can do this in June, that means we can have some vacation in July, which as it stands right now is probably the only time they get to have off. So we'll see about that. That could be another big change that's on the way here very soon. And we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And speaking of Jake Fromm, we'll now bring him on the program as part of a Kroger Fresh Take here today. Great to have Jake here on the program. And Jake, before I kind of get into some of the stuff that's going on with Georgia, let me talk about the playoff thing here, because I know you and I have talked about this here a little bit. We haven't even gotten to a 12-team playoff. That's happening for the first time here this year. But there's already talk of moving to 14 now, and this is more than just conjecture. This is like a real discussion that's happening in some real boardrooms. And there's talk of, well, the SEC would then be guaranteed 3 teams. The Big Ten would be guaranteed 3 teams. The Big 12, the ACC, that'll only be guaranteed 2. It's almost like we're sort of dividing up the playoff pie before the games have actually been played. A lot of fans don't like this. Does this sound like a wrong direction for you for where college football should be going?
Yeah, if there's anything that I've learned with college football is like if you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile.
Yeah.
I want the best 12 football teams in there. Like, I don't care what conference they come from. I want the best 12 teams. And man, if we can figure out an algorithm, well, I guess we tried the algorithm thing with the BCS, sure. And that got it right most of the time. Generally with 12 teams, you're going to give yourself a better chance of getting the best 12 teams in, and then letting them duke it out in a tournament style. So I'm interested to see that, and I think once we start bidding where each conference starts getting a certain number of teams, I think we're getting away from the good idea of what brought us here, and that just being, hey, we want the best 12 football teams and give them an opportunity to go win a national championship.
And see, what you're saying right there, I think, is what's so frustrating for a lot of fans, because you describe it in one sentence. Hey, let's just get the 12 best teams and put in the playoff. And yet when fans listen to the actual powers that be talk about this stuff, like that phrase never comes up. It becomes about how do you divide the money, or how do you guarantee access to lesser leagues, or how do you do it the political part, the boring part. The whole idea of, hey, this is a fun sport. What if we got just like 12 best and let them play in a tournament against each other and saw who the very best was out of those 12? It's almost like that very simple idea that virtually everyone agrees with never actually comes up in the actual conversation that takes place with the powerful people. And that's what sometimes just sort of drives fans crazy.
No, I mean, you're exactly right. It's about TV deals and matchups and fan bases and travel and so many other things that go on with it. look, I don't care. I want good parity in college football. I want good teams. I want good games. You know, and I don't care where they come from. You know, if it's 4 teams from the Pac-12 and 4 teams from the Group of 5 and only 1 team from the SEC, I don't care. I just want good football. And I think that's an opinion that resonates a lot with a lot of college football fans, and I hope that we don't get away from that idea.
So I want to talk to you about James Coley a little bit. This is a guy that you know really well. He's back as Georgia's wide receivers coach. He was also your offensive coordinator in 2019. Let me just sort of start with sort of a general question, and we'll kind of drill down from there. What did you think about Coach Coley now returning to UGA?
Yeah, I think it's awesome. I think it's a great fit. I think it's needed. You know, he's a guy who understands the building, understands the culture, understands what it takes to win. So he's been around a lot of winning football, and I'm excited to see him come back and do great things here at UGA like he's done before.
So I think a lot of people look back on that time for him as offensive coordinator in 2019, and I think it's sort of easy to kind of wonder, okay, what the full story was with that. You know, you had been starting quarterback for Georgia, obviously, in 2018. Y'all were one of the highest scoring offenses in the SEC. I mean, you averaged 38 points a game, which in that era was a lot. Obviously, one of the highest scoring offense in the SEC. The year after Coley, that's when Todd Monken comes in, and by 2021, this is a team that's also scoring right there among the best in the country. But 2019 was a little different. It was not quite as prolific as you had been in previous years, and it would not be as prolific as the Todd Monken offenses would prove to be after that. People talk about, injuries to wide receivers and perhaps a little bit of a, kind of a sort of an influx situation there in that room. Obviously, some of the fingers of blame get pointed to Coley himself. As the starting quarterback for that team, how would you kind of describe what the situation was like with the Georgia offense that particular season?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a culmination of a lot of different factors. You mentioned our, receiver room stayed pretty banged up. I mean, it was Coley's first experience as an offensive coordinator and a play caller. And there's just a lot of factors that factored into maybe not having as much of success as years before and years after. But hey, I can't put a finger or point a finger on any particular thing. And man, at the end of the day, we came up a little bit short and didn't accomplish our goal of winning the national championship. And that's something that's always going to, stick with me.
So you mentioned, a moment ago, being happy to have Coach Coley back. And one of the things he's obviously, well known for is being a really good recruiter. In fact, we've already heard from receivers that he will be recruiting. They're already kind of saying some nice things about him. I'm kind of curious. I think generally a lot of us have some idea of why this is. But for those coaches that kind of develop that relationship, good at forging relationships, good at creating those kinds of bonds. Like, what is it that makes a guy like James Coley a good recruiter, and how is it that he's able to kind of forge the relationships that oftentimes lead to commitments and signings on National Signing Day? How do the good recruiters truly do it?
Yeah, I mean, Coley just brings a lot of energy, and it's genuine energy and excitement. And I think that, just comes from his personality, his culture, and man, he's fired up all the time. And I think that sticks well with young kids and young men in high school and in college. And it's something that they gravitate towards.
It's our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here today on DawgNation Daily. And by the way, speaking of Kroger, you want to gravitate towards something that can be great for you. How about becoming a member of Kroger Boost? When you do so, you get great benefits, more money, more time. You want to be able to get twice the fuel points and the things you're already buying at Kroger. Why not save some money at the pump when you do that? That's what Kroger Boost gives you a chance to do. You can also get free grocery delivery there as well. So make sure you check out the website. It's Kroger.com/boost. That's Kroger. Can be a part of all of that today. The membership model from Kroger Boost, a great way to save money, have more time. You can enjoy all of that today. Josh Crawford also hired as running backs coach, a guy that I think has kind of a cool resume. Obviously, you're a guy that loves high school football in Georgia, and he's been at Lee County, he's been at Colquitt County, been at Valdosta, he's been at GAC, some of the really big-time programs. And, my belief is when you have a chance to bring in a guy like that has such, deep ties to our state, I just think that's always a really valuable thing to be able to do. Crawford's not a guy that I really knew prior to all of this. I've learned a lot more about him, since he's been in the mix for some of these jobs here. But, boy, I really like the resume, and I love those ties, especially down to South Georgia. I think that can be a really valuable commodity for UGA. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do too. I want, very similar to you. Not super familiar with him. Don't know him on a personal level, but everything that I'm hearing and seeing as far as the resume goes, man, it adds up, and it's going to speak well. And I think he's going to do some really good things here at UGA. And as far as Kirby, from a hiring process, he didn't deviate too far from the formula, right? Coach McGee, another guy who has deep Georgia ties, middle and South Georgia, understands high school football in the state. And, he didn't go too far from the formula, and hired a very, very similar guy with a very similar resume.
Before I let you go, this is kind of off the radar of Georgia football, so not everybody in our audience is going to care as much about this, but it's been kind of a hot football topic here. The fact that a guy that you worked with this past year, Eric Bieniemy's leaving the NFL, and I don't think it's official yet, but I think he's expected to be hired as offensive coordinator at UCLA, kind of charting a different path for himself after having left Andy Reid to go kind of run his own offense there in Washington, now leaving the NFL altogether to come, work with Sean Foster and UCLA. Any thoughts from you on, Bieniemy kind of after kind of not getting that head coaching job I think that he was hoping to get, now going to try his hand at college here and running an offense there as UCLA goes in the Big Ten? Any thought from you on that, just given the fact that you worked with him there this year in Washington?
Yeah, I mean, very surprised that he didn't get an opportunity, to be an NFL head coach. Thought he was definitely worthy of an opportunity. I think Coach EB is a great coach, and he does all the little things right. And I don't know, we'll see. Time will tell if he'll, kind of get back and have his name in the running and in the hat for those types of opportunities. But excited to see what he's going to do in college. I think his style, his scheme, I think, can transcend both into the college and in the NFL. So obviously he has a great track record, and excited to see what he's going to do.
Jake, it's always great to have you here as a part of our program each and every week. We love that as a part of the Kroger Fresh Take. Thanks for your insight on a guy you know really well in James Coley and everything else going on with these Georgia Bulldogs. Have a great week, and we will look forward to getting a chance to do this with you again very soon as well.
Thanks, Brandon. As always a pleasure. Man, always glad to be here.
Good stuff.
Thank you.
And as we say goodbye to Jake Fromm and get ready to say goodbye to all of you there as well, let's do so with our golden shoe. Not a great night in the final score column last night for the Diamond Dogs. They do lose a midweek game to Michigan State. You don't make as big a deal about the midweek stuff. But how about Charlie Condon? 3 home runs last night. Had an at-bat to get a 4th, which would have put him in the Bob Horner category with 4 home runs in one game. Those of a certain age will remember that. But what a night for Charlie Condon. And how about me? This is the first time I've ever used a video with our golden shoe graphic. I was pretty happy with myself for putting all that together. The reason why it looks so dark is because they do the LED lights on the home run. But how about that for Charlie Condon last night? 3 home runs. We're going to give him a golden shoe for an incredible performance. And you want to enjoy something right now, the Charlie Condon shows clearly that. He was Player of the Week, last week for the work that he's done. And now 3 home runs last night. This is truly a great player here right now. A lot of fun. Golden shoe coming his way. Lousy, stinking Gators. Nothing but misery and pain coming their way. And it has been a very long time since they have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. How about 1,209 days? That's our Gator Hater Updater. We'll see all of you back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merryweather and Tharp. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews cooldown. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust Merryweather and Tharp on all of R.S. Andrews for all of that. Merryweather and Tharp brings the show to you. They're great. But in this particular case, we're talking about R.S. Andrews. So got my wires crossed there just a little bit. But nonetheless, we'll get your comments here, and glad to have you as a part of our R.S. Andrews cooldown. I am going to start on YouTube, and we'll see how the YouTube folks are doing here today. Paul Moon says one thing he hasn't loved is how in the playoff era, the bowl season is the shell of its former self. I would say that's true, although, and listen, I'm a traditionalist. Everybody knows that. But I've actually sort of made peace okay with the bowl season as they are. And it's important to note that for everything that, for those of us who sort of live and die with college football, we're sort of aware that the teams that we see play the bowl games, that's not the same team that we saw during the regular season, but the response from the larger, more casual fan base, they don't care. They don't care. And look, this sort of gets into what is the true marketability of some of these players if when they don't play, there are no fewer people who tune in. I mean, I do think that's a conversation as we kind of move into the true, authentic professionalization of college football. I do think that's a fair question to ask of, what are we paying for? Because athletic ability does not have any innate value. It is only valuable to the extent that it, provides entertainment that can be commoditized. And if you don't show up for work and nobody notices, then your market sort of negotiating power, I would say, has been lessened. So when it comes to the overall bowl season, we're all aware of, well, so-and-so's not playing for this team and so-and-so's not playing for that team. For those of us who like to make picks for some of these games, we like to kind of, try to get some of our picks right. The games are very difficult to pick, but the average person just wants to see football, and they don't really know any of the players anyway, so what's the difference between number 43 and number 59? They don't really know the difference. And so I think part of the fun of the bowl season now is, it's like going to the Orange Bowl. Clearly that's nowhere near as fun as being the college football playoff, but sort of trying to figure out who's going to show up for Georgia, what's going to look like. I mean, Georgia did some sort of funny stuff. The Ladd McConkey touchdown was not a very regular season Georgia thing to do, I don't think, but they did that for the bowl game. So it is an example of the fact that I would say that college football is pretty resilient overall. That no matter how much – look, I'll be honest with you, I have very little in the way of respect for a lot of the people who sort of exist at the administrative level for the sport. I just don't. I think you would be right not to either. There are times in which I think you've got one of two things happening. Some of the people, I would say, almost feel like they're intentionally trying to take the sport in the bad direction, and others don't know the difference between a good direction and a bad direction. That's never a good mix. But what we see is the sport has remained pretty resilient, even in the face of morons of being at the helm. Now, there are also some different people who are like, well, therefore it's always going to be resilient. It is possible even for something great like college football just to have too many bad actors, kind of toying with it, or too many sort of feckless bureaucrats trying to manage it. It's possible to kind of pick at it too much, but thus far I would say the sport's proven pretty resilient to whatever is going on. Spencer Clark, thanks for the kind words. I was joking with our DawgNation.com audience before the show began. It is very white, and I don't typically wear like a lot of white on the show. This is very, very white, but I appreciate that. Thank you. Alan Hampton says, I love college football. I just hope I continue loving the college football of the future. Times they are changing. Yeah, and I'm always really aware of, like, you want to be careful you don't sound too much like just sort of the old man on the porch of, boy, back in my day, blah, blah, blah. I try to, kind of whatever arguments we make here, because I do think that the tradition of college football needs to be respected. But you want to be careful that you don't sort of start every discussion with back in my day, ... because ultimately that's not a winning argument. Even if it's correct, it's not always a persuasive argument. But no doubt, I think it is very right to be concerned about what would happen to college football or just college athletics if people don't step up and say, hey, what are we doing? And why are we doing this? I think that's very fair. Baggins and Friends, appreciate the kind words. So Nature Gator kind of touches on something, and Aaron Dixon sort of touches on it there as well, which I'm sure is probably the first time that Aaron Dixon's ever agreed with anything that Nature Gator said, or at least they're kind of in the same neighborhood on this. And I'm just obviously picking here, but the point is that the one statement that a lot of people make that kind of both of our commenters there are sort of making that I don't necessarily buy into is people say, there ain't never been one time in my life that I wanted the number 13 team in the country to be the best team in the country. That's just sort of a thing that you sometimes hear. I don't know that I necessarily feel that way, because if you look at the 10-year history, we had 10 years of the 14 playoff. What was the biggest knock on the 14 playoff? The 14 playoff had a lot of blowout losses. There were a lot of bad semifinal games in the college football playoff. Now, if you were to ask me, BA, one reason why the playoff games were typically so bad, why would you say? My answer would be because the people who selected the college football playoff teams simply selected the wrong teams. They're not good at picking the teams, therefore the games they produced are not good. For those of you that like golf, you understand exactly what I'm talking about. What is the definition of a good championship level golf course? Now, the golf course I like to play, it's just because it's pretty. Like I'm not good enough golfer to judge this. But if I'm watching golf on TV, if we're watching championship golf on TV, what is the what is the definition of a good course? I think it's two things. It's the champion it produces and the quality of competition that it produces. I think for the most part, college football has probably gotten its champion right in most years, or at least close enough. But the quality of the competition that's been produced is typically lacking. And the reason why is because they do not pick the right teams. And the reason why they don't pick the right teams is because they pick the teams for the wrong reasons. And I think to the extent we're talking about the 14-team playoff right now, it sort of feels like the same type of deal here. I can absolutely believe that a team sort of near the bottom of the top 10, especially if like think about like 10-2 LSU or, like something like that. Could that team run roughshod through most of the previous Pac-12, the previous Big 12, the previous ACC? In most years, they could. Now, we've been conditioned to believe, well, if you're only third best in the SEC, you can't be one of the four best teams in the country. But when you look at the NFL draft, when you look at the recruiting rankings, when you look at what typically happens in these like week one neutral site non-conference games, why couldn't the third best SEC team, maybe ranked 8th, 9th, or 10th, also be one of the true four best teams in America? Why couldn't that be the case? So some people want to dismiss the expanded playoff because the teams at the bottom part of the playoff don't deserve to be in. I genuinely do not believe that's the case. I think the reason why I like an expanded playoff is because if you have an expanded playoff, if you take power away from the committee to choose the four best, all of a sudden now, by playing their way into the four best, you'll actually end up getting better semifinal games. And this is what I would say to judge the expanded playoff on. The failing of the 14 playoff was bad semifinal games. Let's look at how the new semifinal games look. Are they better, more competitive semifinal games than we had for the previous 10 years? I believe they probably will be. And I would say if you're trying to compare apples and oranges, two pretty different things, a much smaller 14 playoff and a much larger 12 and perhaps eventually 14-team playoff. Let's judge the national semifinals. This year we had two competitive national semifinal games. That's a huge outlier compared to what most semifinal games had been. But let's judge the kind of final four of the future playoff and see if it gives us better games. I believe the expanded playoff will produce better semifinals. Let's circle back on this one day and see if I'm right. Let's see what else. Go for 3-23, which is obviously our buddy G. Grace making fun of us, says that Greg Sankey's eventually going to get this sorted out. Here's the thing, G. Grace, and this is like a real conversation. Like we're all Georgia fan, Bama fan, we all want the same thing, right? We all want good stuff for college football. Like, it kind of worries me a little bit that in the midst of some very serious things happening with college sports right now, some very serious things, it seems like Greg Sankey's more worried about how do you get even more money for the SEC through this playoff process than he is about making sure the infrastructure of the sport, sort of is sort of built to succeed in the future. Now, listen, I'm not against money. Obviously, every day I'm thinking about what I can do to make more money and have more money and, financially based, monetarily based decisions. Of course, we're all making a lot of those on a regular basis. I wouldn't fault Greg Sankey or anybody in college football for wanting to do the same thing. But, this idea that Sankey is going to be the statesman and he's going to rise above the typical muck and mire of the typical conversation, and he's going to point this sport towards a brighter future. I got to say something. If he was going to do that, wouldn't he have already done it? And and I'm not anti-Greg Sankey, but I just don't necessarily believe that Sankey really wants to be the true leader that this sport really needs. And people kind of say the thing about, Nick Saban should be college football commissioner. This is not me poking at Nick Saban, but I would say that Nick Saban, as a coach, was pretty interested in whatever was best for him in a given scenario. He would change his arguments 180 degrees, diametrically opposed opinions depending on what benefited him in the given moment. That's another guy that, just sort of proved to be a little bit of a self-preservationist over the course of his career as an Alabama coach. This notion that somebody really wants to be someone to truly point college football towards a better future. Right now, I don't know that person exists. And I am also kind of in favor of college football not having a lot of centralized planning. I think that, that creates its own set of problems, as you sometimes see in professional sports. It's sort of easy to kind of sometimes capture, any sort of sport that's too centralized that can be somewhat captured sometimes. But in terms of someone like Greg Sankey or Nick Saban as an elder statesman, sort of ex aficionado, I don't know that person exists right now. Greg Sankey's got all the platform he needs to make positive changes that benefits the sport, and he's just not really that into it. Let's see what else. Aaron Dixon says 8 teams for the playoff would be fine. He says 14 is stupid. It's all about the money and not finding the best teams. I agree with you that it's all about the money and not finding the best teams. It seems fairly obvious based on the conversation that's what's true. However, what I don't agree is that the expanded playoff proves that. I think that the partitioning off of the bids, okay, you get these bids, you get these bids, as Jake Fromm said, why can't we just put the best teams in? Why do we have to sort of divide this up on a, it's like I'm sort of dividing cookies among my kids. You get this one, you get this one, you get half of this one, you get half of this one. Like, why are we dividing this up before the season even begins? Why don't we just sort of trust the best teams to emerge? Because the truth is this sport has lied to you for a long time, and Georgia's been on the wrong end of some of these lies. Oh, these conferences are all equal. Georgia, as a one-loss runner-up in the SEC, is inferior to the undefeated champion of some league that no longer exists. This sport has lied to you for a long time, but I don't believe that the expanded playoff is proof that college football is not interested in finding the best team. I believe that the way in which they're sort of dividing up the playoff spots before it even begins, that might be proof of that. Spencer Clark says, was the BCS better or not? Not for me. I'm pro college football playoff. I didn't like the BCS. And if no other reason, I think there are a lot of reasons, but if there's no other reason to value the college football playoff, here's one thing I value about it. Even in a year in which the national champion was a team that we thought it would be, they still had to prove themselves like one more time. It's like in the BCS era, you could play a relatively easy regular season, get to a championship game, and if you won that, you would have been the national champion. Now, for the most part, it was a lot of SEC teams who did play tougher schedules who ended up winning it, but it didn't have to be that way. Like Notre Dame in 2012, for instance. You could play your way into a national championship game, without really having been tested a lot during the regular season. To me, step one of why the college football playoff was a step forward for the sport was that national semifinal required you to play and prove yourself against one more good team. And that was enough to eliminate some teams that perhaps would not have been eliminated during the BCS era. Let's see what else. Let me go to Facebook here for a moment. Okay, so it sounds like we got a little bit of Brock Bowers here. Let's hear a little bit of him from Indianapolis. Good work by our team. A little bit of Brock Bowers from just moments ago there in Indianapolis. Then we'll take more of your comments as part of our RS Andrews cooldown. Here's Brock Bowers from Indianapolis. All right. So you saw that, and we believe you can hear some of that too. So we'll give you that here coming up in just a little bit. Our team up there in Indy for that. So we'll see if we can give some of that to you here coming up in just a little bit. For now, how about more of your comments as promised on Facebook? Lucy Bowers-Borkin says, I don't know what you're going to be able to find in the comment section today. I don't know what subject we're on. Yeah, people are kind of all over the place here right now, which is no problem. Which is no problem. Who was it that criticized? Somebody was like, well, of course he's going to preempt the Facebook comments for the Brock Bowers. Listen, I love you all on Facebook. It's still Brock Bowers, but I do appreciate that. Let's see what else. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff over here right now. Bill Sanders says he can't stand sour cream. So I'm very anti most condiments. Sour cream is one of the worst. Now, the truth is, if somebody mixes a little sour cream into like my mashed potatoes or something, I might not notice that. But generally speaking, like when I go to like the quick service Mexican food places that cost like $40, I'm so anti sour cream. Now I'm also totally neurotic. Like I am not a sane person. But I'm always panicked when I'm getting my burrito and they're sort of like sliding the burrito down the sort of we call aisle thing, counter. They're sliding the burrito down the counter because you get to the sour cream session. All these people are just sort of slopping that sour cream all over the place. And that stuff just spewed everywhere all over the counter. I'm always so afraid they're just going to drag my burrito through the sour cream. Makes me want to vomit. Oh, it's so awful. So awful. I have been known to, and this is a very sort of high maintenance thing to do, sort of, hey, would you mind wiping this down before you bring my burrito across that? I've been known to do that. I try not to do that too much because I don't want to be too high maintenance, but indeed that's the case. All right, we got more comments, but I do want to let you hear some Brock from Indianapolis. Let's get a little taste of that from earlier today.
I have not yet. I haven't watched much tape on the Raiders yet, so yeah. Are you going to be working out tomorrow? We'll see. I mean, if not tomorrow, definitely pro day. We haven't measured in yet. I think it's tomorrow. Yeah. Sorry, repeat. What's the question? I don't know. I think it's pretty cool that they're letting everyone in the game, and just being in the game is pretty sweet.
Brock, is this a good time to be a tight end, like a move tight end, where the NFL is sort of trending that way, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, tight end's a prime position right now to be, and I'm just glad it's now.
How do you look at your game? What do you bring to the team in the pass game?
Yeah, I feel like I'm pretty good yards after catch, and just being able to make people miss, and I mean, just turn good plays into great plays.
How do sports psychologists help you get through the injury?
Yeah, I mean, they just kind of talked to me, said I mean, just helped me through some things because injuries are always tough, and I mean, I just wanted to come back and play, so just kind of work through it.
Brock, who have you met so far?
I don't know. It's hard to remember all the teams. About 15 teams. So.
Brock is one of those 15 teams, the Colts?
Yeah, it was.
Brock, what can you say about Brian McClendon and the job that he's going to do in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, I think he'll do great. He was awesome at Georgia. I loved having him around, and he helped out a lot. So. Yeah, we watched a bunch of film of him at Georgia, kind of film study and see what he does good, and yeah, I mean, it was awesome to watch a rookie tight end come in there and ball out. He does a lot of the little things well. I mean, route running wise, just gets open. I mean, that's what.
All right, so that's good stuff there from Brock Bowers. You can go to the DawgNation YouTube page and see that in its entirety. Obviously, Bowers saying that he's not sure yet if he's going to work out tomorrow. A lot of these guys now go for like the medical evaluation. They go for like the team interviews. They kind of say, as many of you are aware, they save their true workouts for the pro days, which for Georgia obviously coming up in really just a few days in the month of March there. Kind of as Georgia kicks off spring practice, it also traditionally has its pro day. It's usually like spring practice, which is like March 13th, I think, and pro day is usually the next day. I may have my date slightly wrong on that, but you're kind of right there on that. And so Brock kind of letting you know, but he also talks a lot more there. DawgNation YouTube page, the place you can go to find out more of that. And then don't forget tonight, you got Kaylee Manziel live from Indianapolis along with Connor Riley. they're going to be talking more about what goes down with the NFL Scouting Combine as we head towards the weekend. The Georgia players who are there to work out. And if you're Brock Bowers, you've got a decision to make because you kind of know your draft status is at least somewhat solidified. You're a first-round pick. You're maybe top 5. For some of these other guys, they're there to make a name for themselves. And I would say for a lot of the real draftniks, that's when the real entertainment sort of gets there, is when you watch a guy, just kind of make them best of the opportunity. I mean, that's the thing about the draft that I always kind of find fascinating. So what we love in sports is when guys step up in a clutch moment. And during a season, we define clutch in terms of helping your team. But this is the sort of clutch moment that, that if you're at your best, then you have a chance to set yourself up for the rest of your life. It's a phenomenal degree of pressure, just a phenomenal degree of pressure to try to perform under, because now you're playing for your own personal betterment, or you're performing, I should say in this case, for your own personal betterment. That is just, that's just an incredible set of circumstances to sort of have resting on your shoulder. It's incredible drama to watch. It's one of the reasons why I just sort of root for so many of these guys, so openly. And it's not just the guys who get drafted in the first round. We'll be cheering for them during our draft party on the DawgNation cruise. It's the guys who make a roster, who sneak into the draft and find themselves a home. Like, that's just a really cool, compelling story, and I really, really enjoy that. Ken Holcomb says he hates when you can't hear the question of the press conference. Yes, but in a situation like that. Now, I would say that Georgia now there's a lot more microphones at the Georgia press conference. Now, not the player press conferences typically, but in a situation like that, that's what we call in the business a scrum. People just sort of gather around, kind of, sort of unofficial in some respects, or at least a little bit more casual. That's what I mean to say. It's also why a lot of times we'll sort of pull the best quotes and sort of just play the quotes for you, is because we can give you a little bit better context around some of that. Kane Harris says, I love this guy. I wish they could stay 4 years. Listen, I wish Brock Bowers could stay 40 years. I wish Brock Bowers was playing at Georgia for the rest of my life, because I love him that much. Obviously, the way he plays the game, how could you not? Kane also says he's going to make an instant difference for some team. We all know Atlanta's not smart enough to take him, as always. Well, in the case of Atlanta, I will say in this particular case, they probably do need more than what Brock Bowers can provide. Unless they're going to play him at quarterback, they probably need more than that. But I do get your overall point. I do indeed. Let's see what else is going on here. Yeah, a lot of folks kind of rolling in here with some comments. Joel Moody enjoys the hoodie. I'm glad to hear that. So maybe it's not so bad that I'm wearing the aggressively white hoodie here today. By the way, how about this from Ken Holcomb? We have a very interesting audience. He was actually there when Bob Horner hit the 4 home runs. What a swing. Never heard of a so he says, I guess Bob Horner broke is it navicular? Is that how you said that? Navicular bone? And then Kent Holcomb said he ended up breaking both of his. Yeah, Horner had a very interesting career. And I was very young during the Bob Horner time, but goes to Japan, had some injuries. Very interesting career. But, man, when he was swinging, what a swing he had. Hold on. I got to plug in here for a second because I'm going to lose my laptop. But, yeah, Horner was something, man, something. Dale Murphy was always the most popular, guy from my generation back then. But Bob Horner, when I was very, very young, because by the time I got to be a little older, more like 5th, 6th grade, Horner was already gone. But when I was really young, Horner was really popular. I'm a little too young to have remembered the 82 division title. I think Bob Horner was a pretty prominent player on that team. I'm a little too young to have remembered that back when Brett Butler was still here and Brooks Jacoby. A little too young to have remembered that. But yeah. Let's see what else is going on. Let me go to DawgNation.com for a moment. I was talking about, rooting for guys to make a roster. One of the guys in my mind I was thinking about was Kearis Jackson. B-Mac mentions him. He's always enjoyed watching him. Yeah, those are just great stories. And, I've been at practice before, and, Kirby Smart will be, yelling during special teams. He'll say something like, $793,000. He'll be yelling this over the microphone or something. That's the minimum salary you get in the NFL, and you oftentimes make a salary like that for playing special teams. This was his way of kind of cajoling his, players to participate on special teams. That you can go make $800,000 or whatever the number is, playing special teams in the NFL, and that's it. And the one thing I do think that's really good about Kirby is Kirby sort of understands the job market part of football, both for his coaches in terms of where they want to go and players in terms of making a living playing the sport. We see this as it relates to Malik Herring. It's like, you can sort of, gravitate towards a little bit more of a sort of pizzazz, kind of celebrity-oriented Georgia football player. But in the case of Herring, Herring was here. You had to fight just to be on this roster. He was a rotational player, even as a 4-star guy, kind of a rotational player, sort of fighting for even a spot on the roster. And yet he parlays that to being in the NFL. He's still probably fighting for a roster spot up there on a year-to-year basis, but he's winning Super Bowl rings. He's making money. Like, that's cool, man. That's really cool. Morris Rich, by the way, agrees with me when it comes to the Mexican food. Yeah, I'm just really, really weird. Hey, these burritos these days are $100. I mean, gosh, you go to one of these quick service, kind of like nicer Mexican joints. You know what I'm talking about? Like the sort of nicer, sort of Southwestern style, Mexican style food. They're so expensive. So expensive. So expensive. And if I'm paying that much money, now I also get like double steak in mine, so that probably raises the price a little bit. But I gotta have my protein. But if I'm paying that much money, I can't have you dragging my food through the sour cream. I just can't have that. DT says his best Braves in-person moment was when Sid slid. You were there for Game 7 of the '92 NLCS. That's amazing. That's really, really cool. What a moment that would have been. What a moment that would have been. 20 rows behind the Braves dugout. I can only imagine how cool that must have been, for sure. So I remember my grandfathers both used to tell a lot of jokes like this. So I know a lot of jokes like this. And one of the jokes I used to hear, this is back when Michael Jackson Thriller, and he had the white sequined glove. And this is the Braves were so bad. And because they finished last, I want to say 4 or 5 years in a row. They lost 100 games like 3 or 4 years in a row, I want to say. And one of the jokes was, what does Michael Jackson have in common with the Braves? They both wear one glove for no apparent reason, which I thought was really funny. The other one was, not to make a lot of child abuse, but like the kid was in court. And it's like he doesn't want to live with his mom because his mom beats him. He doesn't want to live with his dad because his dad beats him. He says, where do you want to go? He says, I want to go live with the Falcons. They don't beat anybody. That was the other joke like that we used to always hear. All right, let's see what else. On YouTube, Claude White says it's great to be a Georgia Bulldog and a Gator hater. Claude, you are right on both accounts there, for sure. Let's see what else. Lance D says, I missed Falcons talk yesterday. Hopefully they do finally get there's real talent in Athens and not ignored until the late rounds. Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I'd obviously love to see Atlanta draft more Georgia players, but I would also say, in addition to that, the real thing is we didn't have as much time to probably talk about this yesterday as I'd like to have, but like the real outreach opportunity is towards the fans themselves. That, you can point to, we drafted John Fitzpatrick, and we drafted, whatever, we signed Lorenzo Carter. You can sort of point to those things, and factually that's true. But the problem is, from a perception standpoint, from a public relations standpoint, Georgia football fans don't feel embraced by the Falcons. Now, if you're Atlanta, you could say, well, it's not our job to embrace you. We're just going to try to win games. If we win games, you're going to probably show up. Maybe that's the case. But even when Atlanta's had its best teams, I'd say the response from kind of like the sort of OTP, kind of rural part of Georgia that I grew up in, I'd say the response to the Falcons is probably pretty tepid. It's not always, super intense in terms of the relationship to people. Like I grew up in Hall County. Now, Hall County now is a suburb of Atlanta. But when I was a kid, it was sort of a little bit more of a, sort of a rural, sort of extreme exurb of the Atlanta area. And there wasn't a person around there that gave a rip about the Falcons. They just did not care about the Falcons. They cared about Georgia football. Georgia football was their football team. And I honestly believe the Falcons organization is a little jealous of that. That's why I think it's interesting that Raheem Morris used the word jealous yesterday to describe Kirby Smart. I think the Falcons have a history as an organization, especially post Rankin Smith, who's obviously a Georgia donor. I think they have a history of being jealous about that. The Falcons, I believe, and I say this with as much, kindness as possible, I believe the Falcons have a little bit of an arrogance problem. I believe the Falcons operate as if they are a model organization when the actual results don't suggest that. I think that if you went into Flowery Branch or if you went into the Arthur Blank Family Foundation offices and walked the halls there at either place and said what I believe is the truth, that the greatest moment in Atlanta Falcons history happened in 1998. That's the victory in the NFC Championship game on the road against 15-1 Minnesota. I think a lot of the people currently associated with the Falcons would be kind of shocked to hear that because I think they've made the Falcons into something better during the 20-plus years they've owned the franchise than it was before in the Rankin-Smith era. I think this regime has a tendency to look down on the previous ownership. But the truth is the best moment in Falcons history to this day still took place before Arthur Blank owned the team. And I just think a little humility would serve Atlanta well. And I think one of the ways you could also demonstrate that humility is by admitting we're not the most popular football team in the state, not by a long shot. And we ought to do more to embrace Georgia football fans and say, hey, we wear red and black the same as you do. The reason why we do wear red and black is because of you, going back to the 1960s. They wouldn't want to admit that now. They think of themselves as, something sort of transcending the actual state in which they play in, but they don't. And they're not even, top fiddle, in the state really anywhere. And I would point to the Atlanta Braves, who are far more popular than the Falcons are. The Braves have done a lot to embrace Georgia. Now, the Braves also embrace other colleges too, kind of in the surrounding Braves country area. But we've seen Jordan Davis throw out the first pitch. We've seen Blooper, the mascot, at Georgia football games. We've seen the national championship trophy in Truist Park for kind of celebrations. DawgNation has been invited to do events at Truist Park. The Atlanta Braves have certainly made Georgia football fans know they're not just welcome at Truist Park. Their presence is requested. We want DawgNation at Truist Park. The Braves do a lot to make Georgia football fans feel like they're really welcome around Braves country. I'd say the Falcons could do more, especially given the fact that it's the same dadgum sport. It's football to football. One played on Saturday, one played on Sunday. So could Atlanta draft more Georgia players? Probably they could. But the fact that so many Georgia fans think they don't want to, whether that's true or not, that perception ends up being reality, which speaks to a marketing concern. Atlanta's biggest issue is they're just off the radar. Even, we don't, talk a ton of NBA, but, for as off the radar as it feels like the Hawks are, go to a game at State Farm Arena. Trae Young is really popular. Hawks tickets are a little bit tougher than you might realize if you live in the suburbs like I do. The Hawks have a fan base. It's not as big as the NFL, but they have a core fan base right now that's been kind of into the team. Now, they've also sort of squandered some of that, but there is a relationship the Hawks have with the city because of Trae Young. The Falcons don't have any relationship at all, and step one towards creating one would probably be reaching out to some of these Georgia fans and maybe finding a quarterback there as well. All right, let's get a few more comments. Wildman Slayer says he's a blue plate mayonnaise man. I hate mayonnaise. Hate mayonnaise. But my dad, who I obviously miss every day, would be furious to hear somebody mention blue plate as opposed to was it Duke's? That was his mayonnaise of choice, which I always think about him because the first, I guess, season without my father was 2021, and the first game was Georgia Clemson. It was the Duke's mayonnaise game, and everybody got the Duke's mayonnaise there that day. I think about my dad with all of that because he loved Duke's mayonnaise. I would rather vomit. I would vomit at the thought of eating mayonnaise. But man, did he love that Duke's mayonnaise. Let's see what else. Let's see what else is going on here. Let me go back to the comment section. We're going to wrap it up for today. Morris Rich also agrees that Duke's is the best. He also asked about the Falcons getting Justin Fields. I'd be pro Justin Fields in Atlanta. I would. I'd be pro Justin Fields in Atlanta. I think I would. All right, anything else before we go? Kind of a laid-back crowd today, I guess. Let me read this from Willie McMacho. He says, I almost forgot, BA. It's been 1,209 days. This is amazing. Let me read this. I'm assuming this is correct. 1,209 days since we lost a regular season game. Can you believe that? I mean, can you believe that? 1,209 days since we lost a regular season game. So time for me to get going here, ready to do my 45-minute workouts. Everybody have a blessed day. Be back on here tomorrow morning. William, that's good stuff. A great stat to close us out. It is indeed an amazing thing to see just the level of football that Georgia plays on a consistent basis. And obviously didn't result in 3 straight national championships, but how much fun have we had here over the course of these last few years, and how optimistic and excited are we still about the future? I would say a lot of that for sure. So terrific stuff. William, great way to close this out. Y'all check out RS Andrews online at rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. It's kind of cold again, right? Or at least it's expected to be, especially this weekend. So go ahead and get your heating system tuned up if you need to, or if it just stops working, RS Andrews can fix it for you in many cases. So please find them online, rsandrews.com for more on that. That's rsandrews.com. To get in touch with RS Andrews, who of course brings the RS Andrews cooldown to us each and every day. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow to close out our week. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merryweather and Tharp. We will look forward to talking to you then.